I'd been counting down the days for weeks. Our annual family vacation, this time to Lake Tahoe, was supposed to be the highlight of my summer. After a grueling year at work in San Francisco, I desperately needed this break with my sister Melissa, her husband Tom, and their son, my 5-year-old nephew Charlie. We had plans for hiking, swimming, and making s'mores by the campfire. I could almost smell the pine trees and feel the cool mountain air on my skin. My alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. I was already half awake, buzzing with anticipation. I showered quickly, double-checked my suitcase, and called an Uber to the airport. The early morning streets were quiet, with just a few delivery trucks making their rounds. My driver, an older man named Harold, asked if I was going somewhere nice. "Family vacation," I said, smiling. "We've been planning it for months." "Nothing better than family," Harold replied, nodding sagely in the rearview mirror. "My kids are scattered all over now, but we still try to get together once a year." I arrived at San Francisco International Airport just after 6 a.m. The terminal was already buzzing with activity, business travelers in pressed suits rushing to early flights, families herding sleepy children toward security checkpoints, airport employees darting between gates. I checked my phone for messages. Nothing yet from Melissa. We'd agreed to meet at Terminal 3 by the coffee shop before heading to our gate together. After checking my bag, I navigated the security line, then made my way to our meeting spot. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air as I approached. My stomach growled, but I decided to wait for the others before getting breakfast. I found a seat with a good view of the entrance and settled in to wait. 1 hour passed. Then 2. I called Melissa repeatedly, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I texted Tom. No response. A knot of worry began to form in my stomach. This wasn't like them. I checked our flight status, still on time, boarding in 30 minutes. I paced back and forth, checking my phone obsessively for any sign of contact. Final boarding call for Flight 372 to Lake Tahoe. The announcement crackled over the loudspeaker. My heart sank as I realized I would have to board without them. Maybe they'd missed their connection and would catch the next flight. Maybe they were already on board and we'd somehow missed each other. Neither scenario seemed likely, but I clung to hope as I reluctantly made my way to the gate. The flight was uneventful, but I couldn't relax. My mind kept cycling through possibilities, each more concerning than the last. Had there been an accident? Were they sick? Why couldn't they at least send a text? When we landed, I rushed off the plane, scanning the faces in the small regional airport for my family. Instead, as I approached the baggage claim area, a different sight stopped me cold. There, sitting alone on a plastic chair by the carousel, was Charlie. My nephew was swinging his legs back and forth, his small Batman backpack beside him and a rolling suitcase that looked much too large for him standing nearby. His brown hair was uncombed, sticking up in the back, and his shoelaces were untied. He clutched a folded piece of paper in his small hand. "Charlie," I gasped, rushing toward him. "What are you doing here alone? Where's your mom? Where's your dad?" Charlie looked up, his face brightening with recognition. "Auntie Emma," he exclaimed, jumping up to hug me. "Mommy said you'd find me here." My head spun as I knelt down to his level. "Honey, how did you get here? Did you fly by yourself?" I tried to keep my voice calm despite the panic rising in my chest. Charlie nodded proudly. "I was a brave boy. The nice lady with the wings on her shirt helped me. She gave me extra cookies." He held out the crumpled paper. "Mommy said to give you this." With trembling hands, I unfolded the note. In Melissa's flowing handwriting, it read, "Emma, Charlie's been driving us crazy about this trip. Tom and I need a break, just the two of us. We took an earlier flight to Hawaii instead. Charlie's been looking forward to seeing you so much, we figured you wouldn't mind watching him for the week. His stuff is in the suitcase. We'll pick him up next Sunday. Thanks, sis. You're the best." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My sister had abandoned her child at an airport with nothing but a note. The audacity, the irresponsibility, the sheer selfishness of it knocked the wind out of me. I looked at Charlie's innocent face, completely unaware of what his parents had done. "Where's Mommy and Daddy?" he asked, his wide brown eyes searching mine. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. They had to go somewhere else for a little while. But guess what? You and I are going to have the best time together. Just us. Like a special adventure? Charlie's face lit up. Exactly like that, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. A special adventure. As I collected our bags, holding Charlie's small hand firmly in mine, the weight of what had happened began to settle on my shoulders. The vacation I'd been dreaming of had vanished in an instant, replaced by a responsibility I hadn't asked for and wasn't prepared for. I had no childcare lined up back home, no children's clothes or toys at my apartment, no idea how to entertain a 5-year-old for a week. But as we walked out of the airport into the bright mountain sunshine, Charlie skipping beside me and chattering about seeing a real bear, I made a silent promise to myself and to him. We would make the best of the situation. I wouldn't let Melissa's selfishness ruin things for Charlie. He deserved better than that. I just never imagined how completely this moment would change both our lives. The drive from Tahoe Regional Airport to our vacation rental was short but surreal. I'd made hasty arrangements on my phone, canceling our original hotel reservations and booking a small cabin with 2 bedrooms instead. Charlie had fallen asleep almost immediately in the back seat of our rental car, worn out from his solo flight adventure. As I navigated the winding mountain roads, my mind raced. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Charlie's sleeping form, his cheek pressed against the car seat, his mouth slightly open. The casual cruelty of what Melissa had done felt like a physical weight on my chest. I'd always known my sister could be selfish, but this crossed a line I never thought she would traverse. The cabin was nestled among towering pines, with a small front porch and a view of the lake in the distance. Under different circumstances, I would have found it charming. Now, it just looked like the setting for a week of unexpected babysitting. "Hey, buddy, we're here," I said softly, unbuckling Charlie from his car seat. He blinked sleepily, then perked up as he saw the cabin. "Are there bears here?" he asked, suddenly wide awake. "Not in our cabin," I assured him, grabbing our bags. "But maybe we'll see some in the woods from far away." Inside, the cabin was cozy but basic, a small living area with a stone fireplace, a kitchenette with dated appliances, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, but no shower. Charlie ran from room to room, claiming the smaller bedroom with twin beds as his own. "Can I have hot chocolate?" he asked, bouncing on the bed he'd chosen. "Let me see if we have any," I replied, realizing I would need to go shopping for groceries and supplies. Charlie's suitcase contained clothes and some toys, but no food or toiletries. I was rummaging through the cabin's sparse kitchen cabinets when my phone buzzed. A text from Melissa, accompanied by a selfie of her and Tom on a beach, cocktails in hand, having the best time. "How's Charlie?" "He likes mac and cheese and hates brushing his teeth, lol. Don't bother calling, reception is spotty here. T checks again, you're a lifesaver." Something in me snapped. I stormed out to the small back porch, not wanting Charlie to see my anger, and called my sister despite her instructions not to. To my surprise, she picked up after several rings. "What the hell, Melissa?" I hissed into the phone. "Oh, Emma, don't be so dramatic," she replied, her voice light and unconcerned. "It's just for a week. You're always saying you want to spend more time with Charlie. You abandoned your child at an airport. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? How irresponsible." "He wasn't abandoned," she scoffed. "He had an airline escort, and we knew you'd be there. Stop overreacting." "Overreacting?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "You didn't even ask me. You just dumped your son on me without warning and took off to Hawaii. We needed this, Emma. You don't understand how hard it is being parents. We never get a break. Tom's been so stressed at work, and I've been dealing with Charlie's tantrums every day. We deserve some time to ourselves." I stared at the phone in disbelief. "So your solution was to trick me and leave your child alone in an airport with a note? What kind of parents are you?" "The kind who trust their family to help out when needed," she replied coldly. "Look, if it's such a burden, you can book him on a flight home. Though I thought you'd be happy to spend time with your only nephew." "This isn't about not wanting to be with Charlie," I said, trying to rein in my fury. This is about you being unbelievably selfish and putting your child at risk." He wasn't at risk. Stop being so self-righteous. Not everyone can be perfect like you, Emma. I could hear the eye roll in her voice. Anyway, we've got a couples massage scheduled. Gotta go. Have fun with Charlie. Send pics. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, trembling with rage and disbelief. I wanted to throw my phone into the trees, scream until my voice gave out, call our parents to tell them what their precious firstborn had done. But none of that would help Charlie. I took several deep breaths of the pine-scented air, trying to calm myself. When I went back inside, Charlie was sitting on the couch, his legs dangling, looking small and uncertain. "Are you mad at my mommy?" he asked in a tiny voice. I sat beside him, choosing my words carefully. "I'm a little upset that she didn't tell me about the change of plans. But I'm not mad at you, not at all. Mommy said you'd be happy to see me. And she was right about that," I said, putting my arm around his narrow shoulders. "I'm very happy to see you. We're going to have a great time together. Promise?" "Promise." I forced a smile. "Now, let's go find a grocery store and get you that hot chocolate." The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings with Charlie involved early wakings, 5:30 a.m. seemed to be a standard time, and elaborate breakfast requests that I did my best to fulfill with limited cooking skills. We spent our days exploring the easier hiking trails around Lake Tahoe, building sand castles at the beach, and visiting the small tourist attractions that catered to families. Charlie was generally good-natured and easy to please, though he had occasional meltdowns when overtired or hungry. Evenings were the hardest. As bedtime approached, Charlie would ask about his parents, wanting to know when they were coming back, why they hadn't taken him to Hawaii too, whether they missed him. I sidestepped these questions as best I could, reading extra bedtime stories and letting him fall asleep with the small nightlight I'd purchased at the local drugstore. After he was asleep, I would sit on the porch with a glass of wine, alternating between anger at my sister and anxiety about caring for Charlie. I'd never spent this much continuous time with a child before. The constant vigilance was exhausting. Was he too close to the water? Was that food a choking hazard? Did that cough mean he was getting sick? The weight of responsibility for another human being's well-being pressed down on me at all hours. And yet, there were moments, like when Charlie saw a deer in the woods and his whole face lit up with wonder, or when he solemnly presented me with a special rock he'd found that was exactly the same blue as your eyes, Auntie Emma. That filled me with a surprising warmth. I'd never thought much about having children of my own, focused as I was on my career in graphic design. But Charlie's presence in my life, though forced upon me, was stirring unfamiliar feelings. On our fourth day, as we ate ice cream cones by the lake, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom, my brother-in-law. "Hey Emma, hope things are good with the little man. Quick favor, Mel's birthday is coming up next month, and I was thinking of surprising her with a trip to Europe. Any chance you could take Charlie for those 2 weeks? He loves being with you so much." I stared at the phone, ice cream dripping unnoticed down my hand. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't even back from abandoning their child for this vacation, and they were already planning to do it again, for twice as long. Something hardened in me at that moment. Looking at Charlie, happily oblivious as he chased a seagull along the shoreline, I made a decision. This wasn't just about getting through the week anymore. This was about protecting a child who deserved better than what his parents were giving him. When we returned to San Francisco, things would have to change. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but I knew with absolute certainty that I could no longer stand by and watch my sister and her husband treat their son like an inconvenient accessory they could check into storage when they wanted a lifestyle upgrade. "Charlie," I called, "be careful not to get too close to the water." He turned and waved, his face smeared with chocolate ice cream, his grin wide and trusting. "I'm being super duper careful, Auntie Emma." The sweet innocence in his voice broke my heart. He had no idea that he'd been discarded so carelessly, or that the people who should protect him above all others had prioritized their own pleasure over his security. And if I had anything to say about it, he never would know. I would make sure of that, whatever it took. That night, after tucking Charlie into bed with 3 bedtime stories and his favorite stuffed dinosaur, Rex, I sat on the cabin's small porch with my laptop. The mountain air had turned chilly, and I wrapped myself in a blanket as I composed an email to my boss, explaining that I would need to extend my vacation by a few days. I had been vague about the details, saying only that there was a family situation that required my attention. The truth was that I couldn't bear the thought of handing Charlie back to Melissa and Tom on Sunday as planned. Not after the text about Europe. Not after the casual way they had abandoned him. I needed time to figure out what to do, to consult a lawyer perhaps, to understand what options, if any, I had for protecting my nephew. My phone pinged with a notification, another Instagram post from Melissa. Reluctantly, I opened it. The photo showed Tom and Melissa on a catamaran, the azure Hawaiian waters behind them, both sporting deep tans and carefree smiles. The caption read, "Living our best life." Sometimes parents need to put themselves first. Hashtag self-care, hashtag marriage goals, hashtag no regrets. I felt physically ill reading it. The comments underneath were worse, friends praising them for taking time for themselves and nurturing their relationship, completely unaware that they had done so by abandoning their child at an airport. No one knew the truth except me. And Charlie, though he didn't fully understand what had happened. A notification popped up on my laptop, an email from my mother. My stomach clenched. Had Melissa told her what she'd done? Was Mom about to berate me for not being more understanding of my sister's need for self-care? I clicked on the email reluctantly. "Emma dear, how's your vacation going? Your father and I are enjoying our cruise, though the Wi-Fi is spotty. By the way, Melissa mentioned you're watching Charlie this week. How sweet of you to give them some couple time. That boy can be a handful. You know he was diagnosed with ADHD last month. Melissa says it's been so difficult. Anyway, send pictures. Love, Mom." I stared at the screen, a new wave of anger washing over me. ADHD? This was the first I'd heard of any diagnosis. And from the way Charlie had been behaving all week, attentive, engaged, generally well-behaved except for normal 5-year-old moments, I highly doubted the diagnosis was real. It smacked of Melissa looking for an excuse, a way to justify her own impatience and neglect. I closed my laptop with more force than necessary. The more I learned, the worse the situation seemed. Had my sister always been this person? Had I just not seen it, or had I made excuses for her behavior? We had never been especially close growing up. Melissa was 5 years older and had always treated me with a kind of benevolent condescension, but I had never considered her capable of something like this. Sleep evaded me that night. I tossed and turned, memories surfacing of other instances when Melissa had shown troubling signs. The time she forgot to pick me up from swim practice, leaving me waiting alone for 3 hours. The casual cruelty with which she had informed my high school boyfriend that I didn't really like him. The way she had manipulated our parents into paying for her elaborate wedding while I took out student loans for college. There had always been excuses, explanations, ways that her actions weren't really her fault or were somehow justified. At 3 a.m., unable to sleep, I slipped into Charlie's room to check on him. He was sleeping peacefully, one arm thrown over Rex the dinosaur, his breathing deep and even. Looking at him, so vulnerable and trusting, I felt a fierce protectiveness surge through me. This child deserved better than what he was getting. Much better. The next morning, Charlie and I went to a local diner for breakfast. He ordered blueberry pancakes and arranged the blueberries into a smiley face before drowning them in syrup. I watched him eat, my heart heavy with what I needed to ask him. "Charlie," I began carefully, "can I ask you something about home?" He nodded, mouth full of pancake. "Are your mom and dad? Are they home with you a lot?" He swallowed and shrugged. "Sometimes. Daddy works a lot. Mommy has her friends over or goes to the gym. Who takes care of you when they're not home?" "Different babysitters," he said matter-of-factly. "Sometimes they don't come back until after I'm asleep." I kept my face neutral despite the sinking feeling in my stomach. "Do you like your babysitters?" Another shrug. "Some of them. Miss Jenny lets me watch TV all day. Mr. Kevin smells funny and sleeps on the couch. I don't like when Mommy's friend Tasha watches me. She brings her boyfriend and they lock me in my room. I nearly choked on my coffee. They lock you in your room? Charlie nodded, absorbed in creating a river of syrup on his plate. They say I'm too noisy. But I have my toys and books in there, so it's okay. Except when I have to go to the bathroom and they don't hear me knocking. I took a deep breath, struggling to contain my horror. Charlie, does anyone else know about this? Have you told your teacher or your grandparents? Mommy says not to tell, he replied, his eyes suddenly serious. She says if I tell, people will think she's a bad mommy and take me away to live with strangers who are mean. The manipulation was so transparent it made me sick. Charlie, that's not true. No one would send you to live with mean strangers. Promise? His eyes were wide and anxious. I promise, I said firmly. You would always stay with people who love you. Like me or Grandma and Grandpa. He seemed to consider this, then brightened. I wish I could live with you, Auntie Emma. We could have pancakes every day and go to the lake and you wouldn't lock me in my room. I felt tears prick at my eyes and quickly blinked them away. That sounds pretty nice, buddy. Now finish your breakfast and we'll go feed those ducks you saw yesterday. As Charlie demolished the rest of his pancakes, my mind was racing. What he had described went beyond selfishness or poor parenting. It was neglect, possibly abuse. The casual way he had mentioned being locked in his room suggested it was a regular occurrence, something he had come to accept as normal. I had gone from feeling angry at my sister to feeling genuinely concerned for Charlie's safety and well-being. If things were as bad as they seemed, I couldn't in good conscience return him to that environment. But what were my options? I wasn't his parent or legal guardian. I couldn't just decide to keep him. Later that day, while Charlie napped, exhausted from our morning of duck feeding and hiking, I made a call to an old college friend who had become a family law attorney. Emma, it's been ages. Rachel exclaimed when she picked up. How are you? Not great, I admitted, and proceeded to tell her everything, the airport abandonment, the text about Europe, what Charlie had revealed at breakfast. There was a long silence when I finished. That's pretty bad, Rachel finally said. Legally speaking, what they did could be considered child abandonment, especially if they left him at the airport with no guarantee you would be there to pick him up. What are my options? I asked. I can't just give him back knowing what I know now. You could report them to Child Protective Services, she suggested. But I have to warn you, CPS cases can be unpredictable. They might determine there's not enough evidence of ongoing neglect, especially if your sister and brother-in-law present well. And if they do find evidence, Charlie would likely be removed from the home temporarily while they investigate. He might be placed with you as a family member, but that's not guaranteed. The courts generally try to keep families together if possible, which often means giving parents multiple chances to improve. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. So I could report them, put Charlie through a traumatic investigation, and still have him end up back with them? Possibly, Rachel admitted. Family court tends to prioritize parental rights unless there's overwhelming evidence of severe abuse. What you're describing is concerning, but it might not meet that threshold. What about seeking custody myself? That's an uphill battle without the parents' consent, she warned. In California, courts are extremely reluctant to terminate parental rights without extended proof of unfitness. It could be a lengthy, expensive process with no guarantee of success. The conversation left me feeling even more lost than before. After hanging up, I went to check on Charlie. He was still asleep, clutching Rex, his face peaceful. I gently brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. What am I going to do? I whispered. The rest of our week passed in a blur of activities designed to create happy memories for Charlie while masking my growing anxiety. I took countless photos of him building sandcastles, riding on a paddle boat, making friends with a golden retriever on the beach. Each picture captured a carefree child enjoying his vacation, unaware of the storm brewing around his future. On Saturday night, our last in Tahoe, Charlie and I made s'mores over the fireplace. Chocolate smeared across his cheeks, he looked up at me with absolute trust in his eyes. Auntie Emma, can I tell you a secret? He asked, his voice suddenly serious. Of course, buddy. You can tell me anything. He leaned in close, whispering despite us being alone in the cabin. "Sometimes I pretend that you're my mommy instead." The simple statement shattered something in me. I pulled him into a tight hug, hiding my face so he wouldn't see my tears. "I would be so lucky to have a wonderful boy like you," I managed to say. "Then can I stay with you? Please? I'll be really good and quiet, and I won't make a mess." The desperate note in his voice broke my heart. No child should have to promise good behavior to earn love and care. "Charlie, it's complicated," I began, struggling to find words he could understand. "Your mom and dad are your family, but you're my family too," he interrupted, his face crumpling. "And you don't leave me or lock me up." I held him close as he began to cry, his small body shaking. In that moment, watching my nephew cling to me with such desperate hope, I made a decision. I didn't know exactly how, but I would find a way to protect him. This was no longer about my anger at Melissa or my feelings of betrayal. This was about a vulnerable child who needed someone to stand up for him. The path ahead would be difficult, possibly even impossible. But as Charlie's tears soaked into my shirt, I silently vowed that I would not abandon him the way his parents had. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices I had to make, I would fight for him. Sunday morning arrived with a sense of impending doom. Our flight back to San Francisco was scheduled for 2 p.m., and Melissa had texted that she and Tom would pick Charlie up from my apartment that evening. "Can't wait to see my little man," she wrote, as if the past week had been a normal, planned arrangement rather than an act of abandonment. I packed our bags slowly, watching Charlie arrange his collection of special rocks and pine cones on the cabin floor. He'd created an elaborate story about each one. This smooth white stone was a dragon egg, that twisted pine cone was a wizard's staff. His imagination was boundless, his spirit resilient despite everything. "Charlie," I said, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him, "we need to talk about going home today." He looked up, his eyes immediately clouding. "Do I have to go back to my house?" I hesitated, torn between honesty and caution. "Yes, but I'm going to talk to your mom and dad about some changes that need to happen." "They won't listen," he said with the frank certainty of a child who has learned this lesson through experience. "They never listen to me." "They'll listen to me," I promised, though I had no idea if I could keep that promise. "And no matter what, I want you to remember something very important. You can always call me, anytime, day or night, if you need me. I will always come for you." Charlie nodded solemnly, then suddenly lunged forward to wrap his arms around my neck. "I love you, Auntie Emma," he whispered. "I love you too, buddy," I replied, my throat tight with emotion. "More than you know." The flight back to San Francisco was turbulent, mirroring the storm inside me. Charlie fell asleep against my shoulder, and I spent the hours staring out the window at the clouds, mentally rehearsing what I would say to Melissa and Tom. My thoughts veered from diplomatic appeals to family unity to scathing indictments of their parenting failures. Nothing seemed right. Nothing seemed likely to work. By the time we landed, I still had no clear plan. I could only follow my instinct to protect Charlie, whatever that might entail. My apartment in the Mission District felt strange after a week away, smaller and more cluttered than I remembered. I'd always thought of it as my sanctuary, filled with books, art supplies, and carefully chosen furniture. Now, looking at it through the lens of potentially caring for a child, I saw hazards and limitations everywhere. "This is where you live?" Charlie asked, eyes wide as he took in the colorful abstract paintings on my walls and the overstuffed bookshelves. "Yep, this is home," I replied, setting down our bags. "It's pretty," he decided. "Can I see your room?" I gave him the abbreviated tour: bedroom, bathroom, small office where I did my freelance graphic design work, galley kitchen. Charlie explored with enthusiasm, especially delighted by my collection of art books and the window seat overlooking the street. "You could put a bed for me right there," he suggested, pointing to a corner of my office. "Then I could sleep over sometimes." The innocent hope in his voice hardened my resolve. "That's a great idea," I said. "We'll definitely have to arrange some sleepovers." I ordered pizza for dinner, and we ate on the living room floor while watching a cartoon Charlie loved. I kept checking my phone, expecting a text from Melissa announcing their imminent arrival, but there was nothing. At 7 p.m., well past the time they had said they would come, I tried calling Melissa. Straight to voicemail. I texted Tom. No response. By 9 p.m., Charlie was yawning but fighting sleep, anxious about his parents' arrival. I reluctantly prepared the couch as a makeshift bed for him, tucking him in with Rex the dinosaur. "Why aren't they here yet?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "I don't know, buddy," I answered honestly. "But don't worry. You're safe here with me. Get some sleep and we'll figure it all out in the morning." After Charlie finally drifted off, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine, trying to make sense of the situation. Had Melissa and Tom simply lost track of time? Were they deliberately ignoring my messages? Or had something happened to them? At 11:42 p.m., my phone finally buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Hi sis. So sorry, but our flight got delayed like crazy and we won't be back until tomorrow afternoon. Can Charlie stay one more night? Pretty please? You're the best." I stared at the message, anger boiling up inside me. Not even a question about how her son was doing after a week away. Not even the courtesy of letting me know earlier that they'd be delayed. Just an assumption that I would continue to rearrange my life around their convenience. I typed and deleted several furious responses before settling on a simple "fine. Let me know when you're actually on your way tomorrow." Sleep eluded me that night. I kept returning to that moment in the diner when Charlie had so casually mentioned being locked in his room. The way he spoke about it, not as something unusual or traumatic, but as a regular part of his life, suggested a pattern of neglect that went beyond a single bad decision to leave him at an airport. By morning, I had made up my mind. I called in sick to work, then contacted Rachel again. "I need to know exactly what my options are," I told her. "Not just the legal hurdles, but what steps I can take right now to protect Charlie." Rachel sighed. "Emma, I know you're upset, and what you're describing is concerning. But you have to understand, unless there's clear evidence of physical abuse or severe neglect, it's very difficult to remove a child from their parents." "Leaving a 5-year-old alone at an airport isn't severe neglect?" I demanded. "It's definitely problematic," she conceded, "but a single incident might not be enough to establish a pattern, especially if they have an explanation, however flimsy, about believing you had agreed to the arrangement. What about multiple babysitters, some of whom lock him in his room? What about regular absences overnight?" "Those are concerns worth documenting," Rachel said carefully. "But again, the courts typically need substantial evidence that a child is in immediate danger before intervening. So I'm supposed to just give him back and hope for the best?" The thought made me physically ill. "What I would suggest," Rachel replied after a pause, "is to document everything. Take photos if you ever see signs of neglect or questionable conditions in their home. Keep records of any concerning statements Charlie makes. Note dates, times, and details of incidents like the airport abandonment. If you start building a case now, you'll be better positioned if you do need to take legal action in the future." It wasn't the immediate solution I wanted, but it was something. A plan began to form in my mind, not just to document concerns, but to establish myself as a consistent presence in Charlie's life, one that neither Melissa nor Tom could easily dismiss. After hanging up with Rachel, I called my boss, Mark, and requested an emergency meeting. 2 hours later, I sat in his office at the design agency, explaining my situation without sugarcoating any details. "I need more flexibility," I concluded. "I can still meet all my deadlines and handle my client load, but I need to be able to work remotely more often and adjust my hours when necessary. My nephew needs me." Mark leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. "Emma, you've been with us for 5 years, and you've never asked for special accommodations before. You're one of our most reliable designers. If you need more flexibility, we can make it work." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you. I can't tell you how much this means." Just out of curiosity, he added, "Have you considered what would happen if you actually did become your nephew's guardian? That would be a major life change." The question caught me off guard, though it was one I'd been avoiding asking myself. "I'm taking it one step at a time," I said slowly. "But if it comes to that, yes, I would be prepared to raise him." The words, once spoken aloud, solidified something within me. This wasn't just about getting through a crisis, it was about potentially reshaping my entire life around caring for Charlie. When I returned home, Charlie was watching cartoons on my laptop, his legs swinging from my desk chair. He looked up with a bright smile that made all my doubts momentarily vanish. "I made you a picture," he announced, holding up a piece of my sketch paper covered in colorful crayon drawings. "It's us at the lake with the ducks. And look, there's Rex too." "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched. "We should hang it up." "On your refrigerator?" "That's where Mommy puts my pictures." But then she takes them down when her friends come over because they're messy. Another small revelation that pierced my heart. "Well, I think refrigerators were made for displaying art," I told him, finding a magnet to place his drawing front and center on my fridge. "And everyone who visits can see what an amazing artist you are." Charlie beamed with pride, then his expression shifted to worry. "When are Mommy and Daddy coming?" I checked my phone. Still no update from Melissa beyond her midnight text. "I'm not sure yet, buddy. But I have some good news. I talked to my boss today, and I'm going to arrange things so I can see you a lot more often, even after you go home." "Would you like that?" "Yes," he exclaimed, bouncing on his toes. "Can we go to the park by my house? And the ice cream store with the sprinkle station? We can go anywhere you want, I promised. And you can always call me whenever you need to talk or if you're feeling scared or lonely." Later that afternoon, as Charlie napped on the couch, I made a list of all the things I would need to do: research family law more thoroughly, find a therapist for Charlie, establish a regular visiting schedule, child-proof my apartment, look into schools near me in case the situation escalated. The list grew longer by the minute, each item representing another strand in the safety net I was determined to weave around my nephew. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Flight landed. Coming to get Charlie around 6. Tom says thanks for being super aunt." The forced cheerfulness of the message, the absence of any acknowledgement of what they had done, only strengthened my resolve. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. It would be the beginning of a carefully executed plan to ensure Charlie's well-being, with or without his parents' cooperation. As I looked at my sleeping nephew, peaceful and vulnerable on my couch, I made a silent vow. I would not fail him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever sacrifices I needed to make, I would stand firm in my commitment to protect this child, even if it meant standing alone against my own family. The confrontation I'd been mentally preparing for never materialized. When Melissa and Tom arrived to pick up Charlie, they breezed into my apartment with shopping bags and Hawaiian tans, acting as if the past week had been a planned arrangement rather than an ambush. "Charlie Bear," Melissa exclaimed, dropping her bags to open her arms. "Did you have fun with Annie Emma?" Charlie, who had been playing contentedly with some art supplies I'd given him, looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read, a mixture of love, wariness, and resignation that no 5-year-old should ever wear. He went to his mother obediently, accepting her hug with little enthusiasm. "We brought you presents," Tom announced, pulling out a small plastic bag. "A toy dolphin and a Hawaiian shirt just like mine. What do you say, Charlie?" Melissa prompted. "Thank you," he said dutifully, examining the dolphin with mild interest. I stood in the corner of my living room, watching this performance of normal family life with growing discomfort. The disconnect between their cheerful demeanor and the reality of what they had done was jarring. "Can we talk?" I finally said, nodding toward my kitchen. "Charlie, why don't you show your new dolphin where Rex lives?" Melissa rolled her eyes but followed me, while Tom stayed with Charlie. In the kitchen, I kept my voice low but firm. "What you did was completely unacceptable. You abandoned your child at an airport without my knowledge or consent." "Oh my God, Emma, don't be so dramatic," Melissa scoffed. "He was perfectly safe with the airline staff, and we knew you'd be there. It's not like we left him on a street corner." "That's not the point," I insisted. "You didn't ask me. You didn't give me any notice. You just assumed I would rearrange my entire life to accommodate your spontaneous vacation. And you did," she pointed out with infuriating smugness. "Look, I know it wasn't ideal, but Tom and I really needed that break. Charlie had a great time with you, so everyone wins." "He told me about being locked in his room when Tasha babysits," I said, watching her face carefully. A flicker of something guilt? Annoyance crossed her features before she laughed dismissively. Charlie has such an imagination. Tasha would never do that. She's the daughter of my yoga instructor, totally responsible. He seemed pretty clear about the details. Kids exaggerate, she said with a wave of her hand. You know how it is. Or, well, I guess you don't, since you don't have children. Trust me, parenting is a whole different world. You can't take everything they say literally. The patronizing tone made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure. I want to be more involved in Charlie's life, I said firmly. Regular visits, weekends together, that sort of thing. Surprise flickered across Melissa's face, followed by calculation. Well, that would be nice, she said cautiously. Charlie obviously adores you. And to be honest, Tom and I could use the occasional break. Of course that would be her takeaway, not that her son needed more stability and love in his life, but that my involvement would mean more free time for her and Tom. I'm serious about this, I emphasized. I've already adjusted my work schedule to make it possible. Charlie needs consistency. Sure, she agreed too readily. How about you take him one weekend a month? That would be perfect. I was thinking more like every weekend, plus dinner one night a week. Now she frowned. That seems excessive. We're his parents, Emma. We want family time too. I bit back a retort about their apparent definition of family time, and instead said, let's start with every other weekend and Tuesday dinners, then. We can adjust from there. Melissa studied me for a moment, perhaps finally sensing that something had shifted between us. Fine, she conceded. But not this weekend. We just got back and need to settle in. Next weekend, then, I said firmly. I'll pick him up Friday after school and bring him back Sunday evening. With the arrangement tentatively established, we rejoined Tom and Charlie in the living room. Charlie looked up hopefully. Can I stay with Auntie Emma tonight? No, silly, Melissa said with a forced laugh. You're coming home with Mommy and Daddy. But guess what? You get to visit Auntie Emma lots more now. Won't that be fun? Charlie glanced at me for confirmation, and I nodded encouragingly. We're going to have regular adventures together, I promised. Starting next weekend. The goodbye was harder than I expected. Charlie clung to me for a moment, whispering, don't forget about me, as if there was any chance I could. Never, I whispered back, pressing Rex the dinosaur into his hands. Remember what I said? You can call me anytime. After they left, my apartment felt emptier than it ever had before. I wandered from room to room, picking up the small signs of Charlie's presence, a forgotten sock under the couch, crayon marks on a piece of paper, tiny fingerprints on the window glass. The space that had once felt like a perfect expression of my independent lifestyle now seemed hollow without a child's laughter filling it. The next 2 weeks fell into a strange new rhythm. I threw myself into preparations for Charlie's visits, child-proofing my apartment, converting part of my office into a proper sleeping area for him, researching child development and parenting strategies. I called him every evening, conversations that Melissa initially monitored but gradually began to allow more privacy for as the novelty wore off. Charlie's first official weekend with me was a revelation. Free from the anxiety of the Tahoe trip and the uncertainty of what would happen next, we settled into a comfortable routine. Saturday mornings meant pancakes and cartoons. Afternoons were for adventures, the botanical gardens, the children's museum, or simply exploring different neighborhoods in the city. Evenings brought board games, bedtime stories, and long talks where Charlie gradually revealed more about his life at home. The picture that emerged was troubling, but not surprising after what I'd already learned. Melissa and Tom weren't physically abusive, but their neglect was constant and pervasive. Charlie spent most of his time with a rotating cast of babysitters, some caring, some indifferent, a few borderline negligent. His parents' attention came in sporadic bursts, lavish gifts followed by days of minimal interaction, elaborate outings documented for social media followed by being parked in front of the TV for hours. Mommy says she's going to take me to Disneyland for my birthday, Charlie told me one evening as I tucked him in. But she said that last year too, and then she and Daddy went to Mexico instead. I stroked his hair, my heart aching. Well, if Disneyland doesn't work out this year, you and I could do something special instead. What would you like to do for your birthday? He thought for a moment. Could we have a picnic in the park? With those sandwiches you make and maybe invite some kids from my school? The modesty of his request nearly broke me. Absolutely. A picnic with friends sounds perfect. As the weeks passed and our weekends together became the fixed point around which my life revolved, I began to notice subtle changes in Charlie. He grew more confident, more willing to express his feelings rather than just trying to please. He slept through the night without nightmares. He showed genuine excitement about school projects and new friendships. Our Tuesday dinners, initially awkward affairs at Melissa and Tom's house with them hovering and interrupting, gradually evolved into just Charlie and me at a local pizza place or diner. Melissa, true to form, quickly recognized the benefit of having a free evening and stopped questioning the arrangement. 3 months into our new routine, I received an unexpected call from Charlie's school. "Ms. Wilson? This is Mrs. Patel from Lakeside Elementary. I have Charlie in my office. His mother was supposed to pick him up 2 hours ago, and we haven't been able to reach either parent. Charlie asked us to call you." I was already grabbing my keys. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. When I arrived at the school, Charlie was sitting in a chair outside the principal's office, swinging his legs and looking remarkably unconcerned for a child who had been forgotten. "Auntie Emma," he exclaimed, jumping up to hug me. "I knew you'd come." Mrs. Patel, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, regarded me curiously. "You're Charlie's aunt? He speaks of you often." "We're very close," I explained, signing the form she presented to release Charlie into my care. "His parents and I have an arrangement where I take him regularly." She nodded, then said quietly, "This isn't the first time Charlie has been left waiting. Usually his mother eventually arrives, but she's been increasingly unreliable. We've tried to discuss it with her, but she's rather dismissive of our concerns." The carefully professional tone didn't mask the worry in her eyes. "I'm glad Charlie has you," she added. "He's a wonderful boy." "Yes, he is," I agreed, watching as he collected his backpack. "And I'm not going anywhere." On the drive to my apartment, Charlie was unusually quiet. Finally, at a stoplight, he asked, "Am I going to stay with you tonight?" "Yes, if that's okay with you." "I'll call your mom and let her know you're with me." He nodded, gazing out the window. "I knew she would forget," he said matter-of-factly. "She was talking on the phone this morning about going shopping with Aunt Tasha." The casual way he accepted being forgotten stabbed at my heart. "Charlie, it's not okay that she forgot you," I said gently. "You should never have to wait alone like that." "But I wasn't scared," he insisted. "I knew you'd come if I called you." The simple trust in his voice filled me with equal parts warmth and determination. That night, after Charlie was asleep in the small bed I'd set up in my office-turned-bedroom, I made another call to Rachel. "I need to revisit our conversation about custody," I said without preamble. "Things aren't getting better, they're getting worse." Rachel, to her credit, didn't try to talk me down this time. "Have you been documenting everything like I suggested?" "Yes. I have dates, times, details of every concerning incident." Charlie's teacher expressed worries today about Melissa's reliability. "The school has records of late pickups." "That's a start," Rachel acknowledged. "But seeking custody would still be challenging without their consent." "Have you considered a less adversarial approach?" "Sometimes parents who are struggling or disinterested might be open to a guardianship arrangement, especially if it's presented as temporary or a form of help rather than criticism." The suggestion gave me pause. I hadn't considered that Melissa and Tom, for all their failures as parents, might actually be relieved to offload some of the responsibility they clearly found burdensome. "I'll think about how to approach it," I promised. Over the next few weeks, I observed Melissa more carefully during our brief interactions at Charlie's drop-offs and pickups. She seemed increasingly distracted, often on her phone, barely acknowledging Charlie's excited recaps of our weekend activities. Tom was rarely present, apparently consumed by a new job. That required frequent travel. The opportunity to broach the subject came unexpectedly when Melissa called one Thursday evening. "Emma? God, I'm so glad you answered. Tom and I have this amazing opportunity to go to Europe for 3 weeks. His company is opening an office in London, and they want him there for the launch. The thing is, it's all happening super fast. We leave next Wednesday. My grip tightened on the phone. And Charlie, well, that's why I'm calling, she said, her voice rising with false brightness. Would it be possible for him to stay with you? I know it's a lot to ask, but you two have such a special bond, and he's always so happy after your weekends together. The request, or rather, the assumption, was exactly what I had expected, yet still infuriating. But beneath my anger, I recognized the strategic opening Rachel had suggested I look for. Actually, I said carefully, I've been wanting to talk to you about something similar. I've noticed that you and Tom have a lot on your plates right now, and Charlie seems to thrive with consistent routines and attention. Melissa responded, distracted and clearly waiting for me to get to the yes she expected. What if we considered a more formal arrangement? I suggested. Something that would give you and Tom more freedom while ensuring Charlie has stability? There was a pause. What kind of arrangement? A legal guardianship, I said, holding my breath. I would take primary responsibility for Charlie, housing, schooling, day-to-day care, while you and Tom would still be his parents and could see him whenever your schedules allow. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, she said, "You want to take Charlie? Like, permanently?" "Not take him," I clarified quickly. "Share responsibility in a way that works better for everyone, especially Charlie. You and Tom could focus on your careers and travel without worrying about childcare, and Charlie would have the consistency he needs." Another long pause. "I'd have to talk to Tom," she said finally. "This is unexpected." Of course, I agreed, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Think about it. We could meet with a lawyer to discuss the details. It wouldn't have to be forever, just while things are so hectic for you both." After we hung up, I sat in my silent apartment, heart racing. I had planted the seed. Now I could only wait to see if it would take root. The response came faster than I expected. 2 days after our conversation, Melissa texted asking to meet for coffee to discuss the Charlie situation. The phrasing, reducing her son to a situation, told me everything I needed to know about her mindset. We met at a small cafe near my office during my lunch break. Melissa arrived 20 minutes late, flustered and immediately ordering a triple espresso. Her hair was perfectly styled, her outfit fashionable, but there was a frantic edge to her movements that I hadn't noticed before. "Sorry I'm late," she said, though she didn't sound particularly sorry. The traffic was insane, and I had a million things to do before this trip. "Speaking of which, have you thought about our request for Charlie to stay with you?" "I have," I said carefully. "But I'd like to discuss the more permanent arrangement I mentioned first." Melissa stirred her espresso with unusual focus. "So, you basically want to raise Charlie?" "I want to give him stability and consistency," I corrected. "And yes, that would mean him living with me most of the time. But you and Tom would still be his parents. You could see him whenever you want, be involved in major decisions about his life, spend holidays together, whatever works for all of us." She took a sip of her drink, avoiding my eyes. "Tom and I talked about it last night." My heart rate quickened. "And? He thinks it might be a good solution, at least for now." She said it quickly, as if getting the words out before she could reconsider them. "His new position is going to involve a lot of international travel. We were already talking about boarding schools eventually, but Charlie's still so young for that." I tried to hide my shock at how casually she mentioned sending her 5-year-old away. "So you're open to the guardianship idea?" "Maybe." She finally met my gaze. "But we'd need some conditions. We don't want to feel like we're being judged or replaced. We'd want regular updates, the right to take him for special occasions, that sort of thing." Of course, I agreed quickly. "This isn't about replacing you. It's about creating the best environment for Charlie while respecting everyone's needs." She nodded, fidgeting with her napkin. "There's something else," she said after a moment. "Tom and I have been talking about moving to London permanently if this job works out. His company has an incredible relocation package, and the opportunity for advancement is huge." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just considering my guardianship proposal for convenience, they were potentially planning to leave the country altogether. I see, I managed to say. And when would this move happen? Nothing's decided yet, she said with a dismissive wave. But possibly within 6 months. Which is part of why your offer is so timely. Charlie's settled in his school here, has his friends. Uprooting him might be harder than alternative arrangements. Alternative arrangements. Such a clinical way to describe essentially giving up her child. I swallowed my anger, focusing on the practical implications. If you do move abroad, what kind of relationship would you want to maintain with Charlie? Oh, we'd video chat regularly, she said brightly. And he could visit during summer breaks. London isn't that far. To a 5-year-old who sees his parents only through a screen, London might as well be the moon. But I kept that thought to myself. Let's take this one step at a time, I suggested. First, the temporary guardianship while you're in Europe for these 3 weeks. Then we can discuss a longer-term arrangement when you return, maybe with a family lawyer to make sure everyone's rights and responsibilities are clear. She visibly relaxed. That sounds reasonable. And yes, Charlie can definitely stay with you while we're away. I'll bring him and his things over on Tuesday evening before our morning flight. As Melissa gathered her purse to leave, she hesitated, then asked with surprising vulnerability, "Do you think I'm a terrible mother?" The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I considered sugarcoating my response, telling her what she wanted to hear. But that wouldn't serve anyone, least of all Charlie. "I think you're someone who didn't really want to be a mother," I said. Gently. And there's no shame in admitting that. What matters is what's best for Charlie now. She flinched, then gave a small nod. "He's always been happier with you anyway," she said softly, then turned and walked away before I could respond. I sat in the cafe long after she'd gone, processing what had just happened. It felt surreal, like I'd just negotiated taking custody of my nephew over coffee and espresso, as casually as people might discuss borrowing a car or subletting an apartment. Yet beneath the casual facade, I recognized the magnitude of what was unfolding. Lives were being reshaped, futures redirected. That evening, I called Rachel to update her on the situation. "This is actually the best-case scenario," she said when I'd finished explaining. "If they're willing to grant you guardianship voluntarily, the legal process becomes much simpler. We can draw up the paperwork, have everyone sign, get it approved by the court, and Charlie could legally be in your care within weeks. And if they move to London? What happens then?" "That would depend on the specific terms of the guardianship agreement," she explained. "If they want to maintain parental rights while living abroad, we can structure it that way. If they're considering something more permanent." She paused delicately. "Like adoption?" I supplied, the word simultaneously thrilling and terrifying me. "That would be a separate process down the road," Rachel cautioned. "But yes, if they eventually decide they want to relinquish parental rights, adoption would be a possibility. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, though. For now, let's focus on the temporary guardianship for their European trip, then the longer-term guardianship after that." When Tuesday evening arrived, I found myself pacing my apartment, simultaneously excited and nervous. I'd spent the weekend transforming my office into a proper bedroom for Charlie, a real bed replacing the temporary one, a small desk for homework, bookshelves filled with children's books, walls decorated with framed prints of dinosaurs and space scenes. Melissa arrived with Charlie and a surprisingly small amount of luggage, one suitcase and a backpack. "Most of his stuff doesn't really fit anymore anyway," she explained with a shrug. "You'll probably need to take him shopping." Charlie explored his new room with wide-eyed wonder. "Is this all for me?" "For real?" "For real," I confirmed, smiling at his excitement. "Do you like it?" "It's the best room ever," he exclaimed, bouncing on the bed. "Can I stay here forever?" Melissa and I exchanged a look over his head. "We'll talk about that when your mom and dad get back from their trip," I said carefully. "For now, you're here for 3 whole weeks. That's a lot of adventures we can have." After a surprisingly brief and unemotional goodbye from Melissa, a quick hug for Charlie, a reminder to be good for Auntie Emma, and she was gone, Charlie and I settled into our first evening of our temporary new life. Are you sad that Mommy and Daddy are going away? I asked as I helped him unpack his clothes. Charlie shrugged. Not really. They go away a lot. But usually I stay with babysitters who don't know how to make pancakes the way you do. The simple statement, devoid of self-pity or resentment, squeezed my heart. Well, we can have pancakes every morning if you want, I promised. He beamed, then grew serious. Auntie Emma, Mommy said I might come live with you for a long time. Is that true? I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. Your mom and dad and I are talking about it. They have a lot of work and traveling to do, and they know how much you and I enjoy being together. Would you like to live here with me? Yes, he said without hesitation. But his face clouded with worry. Would that mean they don't want me anymore? No, sweetie, I said quickly, pulling him into a hug. Your parents will always be your parents, and they'll always love you. Sometimes families look different ways. Some kids live with their mom and dad, some live with just one parent, some live with grandparents or aunts or uncles. What matters is that you're with people who love you and take care of you. He seemed to consider this. Like Max in my class lives with his dad and stepmom because his real mom lives in Australia? Exactly like that, I agreed, relieved at his understanding. Okay, he said simply. I want to live with you. And we can visit Mommy and Daddy sometimes, like Max visits his mom in Australia. The 3 weeks of temporary guardianship flew by in a blur of new routines and adjustments. There were challenges, figuring out school drop-offs and pickups while maintaining my work schedule, learning to cook meals that a 5-year-old would actually eat, dealing with the occasional meltdown or nightmare. But there were far more moments of joy, Charlie's delight at feeding the ducks in Golden Gate Park, his pride in learning to ride a bicycle without training wheels, his growing confidence in reading bedtime stories to me instead of the other way around. I enrolled in a parenting class at the local community center, connected with a support group for kinship caregivers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and other relatives raising children, and consulted with a child psychologist about how to help Charlie process the changes in his life. By the time Melissa and Tom returned from Europe, bronzed and laden with shopping bags, a tentative new normal had been established. They came to my apartment for dinner, and I watched with a mixture of sadness and validation as Charlie showed more excitement about his new pet fish than their return. After he was in bed, the 3 of us sat at my kitchen table with the guardianship papers Rachel had prepared. Tom read through them methodically while Melissa fidgeted with her wine glass. These look reasonable, Tom said finally. One thing, though, can we add something about advance notice if either of us wants to take Charlie for a special trip or holiday? With my work schedule, I need to plan pretty far ahead. Of course, I agreed, making a note to have Rachel revise the document. And we'd still be responsible for his health insurance and major medical decisions? Melissa asked. If that's what you want. Or I can add him to my insurance if that's easier with you being out of the country. They exchanged a glance. Actually, Tom said, clearing his throat, that's something we wanted to discuss. The London position has been confirmed. We'll be moving at the end of next month. Despite having anticipated this, the finality of the announcement still hit me hard. I see. And have you thought about what that means for Charlie long term? We think your guardianship makes the most sense, Melissa said quickly. At least until we're settled and see how things go. Maybe in a few years, when he's older, he could join us in London for school. I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that a few years was a lifetime to a 5-year-old, that their casual approach to parenting from another continent was exactly why we were in this situation to begin with. Instead, I said, let's focus on the immediate future then. You're comfortable with Charlie living with me permanently, with you maintaining parental rights and having visitation whenever you're in town. They both nodded, looking relieved at my practical approach. We can send money for his expenses, of course, Tom added, and stay involved with school decisions and whatnot. The whatnot, his son's emotional well-being, his hobbies, his friendships, his daily joys and sorrows, apparently didn't merit specific mention. 2 weeks later, with the revised guardianship papers signed and filed with the court, I found myself standing with Charlie at San Francisco International Airport, watching as his parents prepared to board their flight to London. The irony of returning to an airport, the place where this journey had begun 4 months earlier, wasn't lost on me. Melissa knelt to hug Charlie, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Be good for Annie Emma, okay? We'll video call every weekend, and you can come visit us in London for Christmas." "Okay, Mommy," Charlie said, accepting her hug with the same reserved politeness he always showed her. "Don't forget to send pictures of the palace guards with the funny hats." "I promise." She stood, looking uncertain, then surprised me by pulling me into a hug as well. "Thank you," she whispered. "He deserves better than what we can give him right now." It was the first time she'd acknowledged the reality of the situation so honestly. I hugged her back, a complex mix of emotions swirling through me, anger still, yes, but also a strange kind of gratitude that she had recognized her limitations, even if far too late. Tom's goodbye was more awkward, a handshake for me, a pat on Charlie's head, and mumbled assurances about sending Christmas presents. Then they were gone, disappearing through the security checkpoint toward their new life. Charlie and I stood side by side, watching until they were completely out of sight. He slipped his small hand into mine. "Are you sad?" I asked softly. He thought about it for a moment, then looked up at me with those clear, honest eyes. "A little bit, but also happy because I get to live with you for real now." "For real," I confirmed, squeezing his hand. "Let's go home, buddy." As we walked out of the airport into the bright California sunshine, Charlie skipping beside me and chattering about whether we could get a dog now that his room was permanent, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be legal hurdles, emotional challenges, financial adjustments, and the ongoing navigation of an unusual family structure. Charlie would have questions as he grew older, possibly anger or confusion about his parents' choices. But for now, in this moment, walking hand in hand with my nephew, who felt more like a son with each passing day, I knew with absolute certainty that we would face whatever came together. The grief of broken family bonds was slowly transforming into the hope of new beginnings. The burden that had been thrust upon me so unexpectedly had become the greatest gift of my life. "Race you to the car," Charlie suddenly exclaimed, breaking free of my hand to dash ahead. I laughed and ran after him, my heart lighter than it had been in months. This was our new reality, imperfect, unexpected, but filled with love and possibility. And for both of us, it was enough.